science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction. Fiction. Fiction.
Meaning-making salutations to all you cognonauts out there, and welcome to Exofathom, the show that dares to explore the outside reaches of understanding. I am Nick, and I am joined, as always, by my two lovely co-hosts. Ayla, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you as well. And we got Mike here. How's it going, man?
Coffee.
Coffee, good.
Coffee.
We like coffee.
How are you doing, man?
I like coffee too, and it is the meaning of life in my book, so perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for listening. We very much appreciate all of you out there in the interwebs land taking the time with us this evening to go through this conversation about the meaning of life. And this is quite a lofty endeavor. And we're probably going to get a lot of things wrong, and that's okay, because we're not really going to talk about what our thoughts are about the meaning of life. We're going to explore 23 philosophies that tackle such question and what they think the meaning of life is. And that's when we can interject and be critical and put in our 2 cents. And so the structure of this is going to go, I found this article, and I want to shout out the article first before we do anything else. It's called Adomia. I think that's what it's called. Adioma, my God. Blog.adioma.com, and it's called The Meanings of Life According to Different Philosophies. And I had stumbled across this because I wanted to get into this conversation. And in my research, I found this as a really valuable resource. So we're going to be using this article to sort of introduce these philosophies with little blurbs, and then talk about the concepts. And then I want to share a quote from each philosophy that I came up with. Well, I didn't come up with, I found. So it should be a fun conversation. There's 23 of these, so I don't know how long this is going to take. We may have to break this up into a couple segments, a couple episodes, just a matter of how the conversation goes. So we're not going to put any expectations on it. We just want to take this trip through the philosophy of what the meaning of life is. But before I get started, I want to ask my co-hosts what the meaning of life is to them. Now, make sure that you answer thoughtfully and accurately, because you are being tested.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. I'm guessing. Yeah. I would just say that the meaning of life is to experience life. And I know that's really simple, but, my kind of rationale is that there had to, whether there's an external being that created all of this, or the atheists are right, or whatever the case is, the truth is that we were born without really knowing why we're here, what we're supposed to do. And I think that not knowing is a clue towards why we're here, which I think is just to be in relationship with one another, in relationship with the earth, and in relationship to our experiences of being alive. And not so much in like a hedonistic way, right? Like, you don't want to just experience all the good things. That's why suffering is a part of reality. I think that, there's just this across the board understanding that as you move through the world, you're just learning and you're relating to different entities. And so to just, to know thine own self, I think, is kind of part of it.
Well, that's very interesting. I think you covered maybe a few different philosophies that we're going to cover this evening. So, and I think that that's kind of the point of this whole experiment here. I think what we will find is that we agree with a lot of the sentiments, and perhaps each sentiment is a piece of the whole. But Mike, what do you think? Is it just coffee, or is there more?
Coffee.
Just coffee.
No. I'm just trying to pick my words wisely, because this is something that I've spent now maybe a 12 years of my life thinking about without any sort of like, only in like the last 6 years or so I've had some sort of like formal philosophic understanding. So what I've arrived to is I don't think there is an inherent meaning to life. I think meaning is a engineered product of consciousness. If you accept that there is no meaning, then you can start to build on various meanings. But if you are like, it's terrifying to think that there is no meaning in life. So your brain reflexively reacts and creates meaning. But you can kind of step in the middle of that process and engineer different meanings based off of different things, such as faith, such as cosmic debts, such as boredom. To you can keep away boredom to knowing yourself, as Ayla said. So, and I do think that in those constructed meanings, you can rip those apart should you find that it's not working for your life, whatever that means to you, and then rebuild in a different fashion.
Yeah, I think that that's apt. I think that's a good analysis. And I think what both of you guys are sort of hitting on is that it's complicated. And it's a loaded question, I think, for a purpose. And it's because, like Mike mentioned about this sort of accepting life as meaningless makes you reflexively create meaning. I think that also this question reflexively invokes not just one answer. I think that there's something about humans that don't want the one answer. I think that we want a multitude of answers, and I think that the exercise of contemplating the meaning of life can elicit a multitude of answers, and maybe ad infinitum. Who knows? At least some philosophers would suggest that it is the case that there is total subjectivity to the meaning of life. So. But yeah, so I wanted to ask you that just to get you guys warmed up a little bit. The way this is going to happen is I'm going to just go through the philosophies one by one. I'm going to read a brief synopsis of the core of the philosophies, and then I'm going to give you guys a quote, and you guys can comment however you see fit. I'll make sure that we have like a little bit of time after each one to talk about it.
Before we start, though,
yes,
what do you think the meaning of life is?
That's a good question. My I thought about this when I was a kid, and I'll give you my kid answer. My kid answer was to avoid death.
What a wise little kid.
That sounds quite life affirming.
Yes, absolutely. To avoid death. And that was the point for me. I remember thinking about that when I was young, and I'm like, trying to be like a philosopher when I'm like 11. What is the meaning of life? To be alive.
There's a time when I was a kid where I would ask myself, like, will I ever see out of these eyes again? Or would I see out of somebody else's eyes in the future? And for some reason, that weird childlike thing terrified me to no end.
Yeah, it's scary. Whose eyes are you looking through?
Yeah, like, what's going on? What is this? Why am I here?
Right. Totally. But yeah, so I think this will be a fun conversation. We're going to take our time with it. I don't want to rush. If things, if one of these sparks, more conversation than another, that's totally fine with me. Let's just see how we feel after we get through some of these. You guys ready?
Oh yeah,
very good. So I'm going to have to minimize this because I created a little slideshow for you guys for each of these points, and I hope y'all enjoy. I just wanted to kind of integrate a little bit more visuals to our show as well, since we don't necessarily show our faces. I wanted something for the audience to look at, and so I created a little slide for each one of these concepts, and we're going to start with number one, natural pantheonism. And the brief little one-liner that I put in there is God is in everything. And natural pantheism dates back to prehistoric times, and it believes that God is in all things, and that all things together comprise an all-encompassing God, and that the meaning of life is living in harmony with all that there is. The Pantheonism is an ancient idea that was formalized as a separate philosophy in the Ethics by the Dutch philosopher Baruch Spinoza in 1632 to 1677. And so natural pantheism, I think we can think of, a lot of shamanism, a lot of, the simplest way to even to even break this down in a more colloquial sense is the force. The force permeates all things. It is in all things, and is animated by everything is animated by this sort of essence that would be called the force or God. And so I wanted to share a quote, and I thought, who better to represent the idea of natural pantheonism than Henry David Thoreau? And he said, "My profession is to always find God in nature." And it's a very easy, simple quote, but it made me think, well, you have a really easy job then, right? And perhaps that's the point of the quote, is that if you are able to find God in all things, and that you make that your purpose in your life and your job, you'll find that it's very easy. What do you guys think?
Would you like to go first, Ayla?
No, I'm humming over here. Go ahead,
right.
Mike.
Well, I mean, it can be very easy, but at the same time, I can see it being very difficult, right? Because nature can be scary. Nature can be cruel. Nature can just doesn't really care about you, really. So to find God even in those instances can shake people. And then too, there's like the notion of the logos as well, going back to like ancient Greek times, right? To kind of that is also a natural pantheism, or like notion of cosmic snakes, like just that living force that exists in everything from rocks to conscious beings. So I mean, I can see it, but I don't think it's as easy as one would hope if you take into how cruel nature can be.
Yes, and I think that kind of illustrates the concept that God was also very cruel back when natural pantheonism was bigger. We have stories of very vengeful gods, terrible gods that weren't in our best interests. And I think that does accurately reflect nature, because you're right, nature can be very cruel, especially to humans, but I don't necessarily think that in its cruelty it's not godlike. But yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from.
Maybe I'm just hoping that God is like benevolent and just looking out for humans,
Right,
and
absolutely.
Like, yeah. But if I'm like on a hike somewhere in the middle of nowhere and I break my leg, there's a high probability that I'm going to die.
Very much so, yes.
I was like, well, there goes that beneficial God, I guess. That benevolent being.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with Mike. I think, the cruelty aspect, I feel, is a byproduct of free will. And so, it's like nature's cruel, but it's also like that cycle of life thing. So, yeah, I mean, I'd co-sign a lot of what you both said on that one. Seems pretty straightforward.
All right. Well, we're blazing through this a lot faster than we would. I'm actually kind of stoked because we might get to all of them in this episode. All right, cool. All right. So that's it for natural pantheism, and we definitely have examples in real life. I think of shamanism and even the force in all. Oh man! Oh come on, bro. Jeez. I know, spoiling the surprise. Sorry, guys. Okay, so what is next here? I'm gonna try to let's see, minimize that so that I can get all the way up here. We have number 2, and that is theism. Of course, we're all very familiar with this concept of theism. Theism is the belief in God, the being God. And this one-liner that I put is, meaning is prescribed by God. And I thought this was really interesting because theism also is a prehistoric sort of concept. And it's the proposition that God or a supreme being exists, and that the meaning of life is then prescribed by the God that one believes in. And it dates back to the dawn of humanity, where it's practiced in various forms. Obviously, we know we have the big 3 religions, the Abrahamic religions, and then obviously dozens other religions that have a sort of central God figure. And I pulled a quote from, funnily enough, from Willie Nelson from this one. And I thought it's kind of an interesting concept. He says, and I quote, "I don't think that any person has any specific or special knowledge about what God has planned for you and me, and you and me have, or I'm sorry, for what God has planned for me and you any more than me and you do." And that touches on this kind of concept that the meaning of life isn't going to be something that can be known by humans because it solely rests in God's hands. Now, that's a very specific sort of religious sentiment, and I see where it can have, at least in my opinion, I can see where it can kind of give somebody a sigh of relief, that perhaps the meaning of life doesn't have to be achieved or understood by humans, because we can place it in the hands of this sort of all-knowing entity, like Mike said, hopefully a benevolent entity, and we can be done with this sort of search. That also breeds the stagnation, unfortunately, that tends to come with very strict religious theology or ideologies. But I do see a very sort of romantic sentiment in it. I think it is very romantic to think that like the mystery is only God's to know.
Yeah, I mean, well,
sorry, you guys are both jumped on at the same time.
I know. Sorry, go for it, Mike. I'm
no,
curious.
you go first. I went first last one.
I know. That's why I was going to go first, and then my idea just went out of my mind. So no, we're talking about theism. Yeah, I think my only red flag on that is God is filtered by who? Without an actual God around us, there's nobody to tell us what God thinks. So I'm a little bit skeptical of this one, because it's always going to be filtered through a human with good or bad intentions. It's just inherently flawed.
So that's a good point. Perhaps it's impossible for God to actually prescribe any meaning for us, because we are incommunicado, at least in the physical, literal sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's like a double-edged sword, right? Where like it can be used as a tool for you to accept your place in life, rather than try to make it better. But at the same time, it's something that takes a lot of comfort, right? Like you can't control everything, so you shouldn't worry about this whole meaning of life nonsense when there's coffee to be made. Right?
Yeah.
We gotta go make some coffee.
Right.
But
right.
At the same time, though, if you give that control over to an aesthetic class, like in these rigid religious ideologies, then they have full control over you, right? And you can be punished, and you should punish yourself, and you have to pay penance, and all of these notions that make living even more, or it makes life pretty much suffering, I guess. And you're not allowed to know the grand design behind it, because this is your place, this is what was meant to happen. You're just a sinner. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, it is a double-edged sword for sure, I think. And it makes me kind of sad for God, to be honest. The things that are done in his name or her name or its name, whoever, it doesn't have to be gender specific, but the things done in God's name definitely would probably make them weep.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole, you get back to like the free will thing, right? Like once God is giving you free will, there might be a bigger meaning and plan, and maybe the plan was like you just see the negative effects of free will, which brings you back into like trying to read the religion in a way that is beneficial for all of humans.
I like that. There is a silver lining after all. Yeah.
I mean, you gotta stay positive in times of persecution.
Absolutely, you do. Yes, indeed. And it is true that, sometimes, at least, especially within the theism sort of aesthetic and philosophies, humans need a lesson. And that would seem to be a universal truth about humanity, is that sometimes we do not understand until we actually experience.
Yeah, and like you, if you can't, I mean, like before theism, we were arguably barbaric, right?
Mm.
Because we didn't have moral frameworks, and this was the best way to hand out moral frameworks in hopes that we wouldn't be as barbaric.
Hmm. Yeah,
I think.
absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Ayla, you got anything?
Well, I mean, I get the idea of it as a mechanism for reducing barbarity. But again, I get back to this idea of like, well, who's saying that? Was that God's will? Um, or is it just like a mechanism of, I don't know, humans doing what humans do? Which if humans doing what humans do are doing God's will, then yes. So I think like you can definitely look at it in a lot of interesting ways. And you raised some really cool points, Mike. So yeah, I mean, for me, just the fundamental issue with this one is just you don't have that direct contact.
Who says
And
who
huh?
says who says something is good and who says something is evil? Who
Hmm.
gets to
Right.
decide?
And
Well,
yeah,
it
and
becomes
even
it
if
becomes human instead of God, right?
Yeah.
yeah, and then even if like something godlike appears, how can you trust it? Right? So, like, let's say I go back in time and I show fire to humans that never had fire before. They might think I'm godlike. And then if I say, go do my bidding or whatever, like, is that their only conception of God? And also, too, it denotes this limited universe where there's one God for everything. But so much of our conception of God is based to this planet and what we know here.
Mhm.
So if you expand outward, it's like, well, who's the top god and
Well,
which god?
God is the top of the hierarchy, right? It's the eye on the top of the pyramid.
Right.
So
I'm
it
just
doesn't matter
saying,
what falls underneath it. God is always above it.
yeah, but I'm just raising, I guess, the awareness of doubt in that
Mhm.
anything, even presenting itself to be godlike, is going to be subject to scrutiny because
Yeah,
there could always be a
absolutely.
god to
As well
rule
it
that
should.
god. Hmm.
Well, as well it should, and nothing should be presented as godlike on the mortal plane, anyways, because nothing we can produce is godlike. So, I mean, and that's the conceptual, at least my personal conceptualization of God is an abstract. It's perfection. It's the penultimate, the utmost. So, of course, any iteration or manifestation of it on a human plane is going to be imperfect and probably wrought with a lot of problems. And then you add in corruption and personal biases and letting power, just run amok. Then yeah, you're going to have a lot of problems, as we've
Hmm.
seen. As we've seen.
It's very important to see who controls that whole genealogy of morality, right?
Hmm.
Like who gets
Hmm.
to say, who gets to show themselves as godlike, or even in a polytheistic system, multiple gods, then which one is going to rule, and should you follow one or the other, and then you could, yeah, it gets messy. But I do think the ability to have a dialogue, the ability to talk ideas can be very close to God, or just ideas as a whole are very, it gets closer to a godlike thing.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and I love that because it really is, it's up to everybody's own interpretation, and it's basically asking, what is God, is saying like what is at the top of your value hierarchy, and
Coffee.
coffee is, yes,
I'm
definitely.
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you guys. So you got anything more about theism, or would you like me to move on?
I mean, we could talk more about values, but I know we have quite a
Mhm.
few more philosophies to get through. But I
Oh
do like,
yes.
well, I was just gonna say I do like the idea of the tethering of a godliness to a value system,
Hmm.
and ascription of value is something that a lot of philosophers talk about. Um, the origins of value, the merits of value, the definition of value, the longevity of value. So I think, like, in a lot of different ways, that is so impermanent that it makes you wonder how can you have a meaning of life based on something that's so undefinable, impermanent, easily corruptible. It seems kind of like a shaky foundation with which to ascribe your meaning. right? Ooh,
Yeah.
maybe my computer agrees.
And value systems can be shifted, or you can be corrupted, like you said, but it's at least provides a base for building some sort of moral compass when you are inexperienced and cannot build your own.
Well, that and it sort of structurizes the chaotic, So, like, if everybody has and this is true that everybody's subjective concept of God is subjective, but in order to create a society and progress as a collective, you have to unify under an umbrella of ideas. And so, perhaps the prescription of meaning from God was that thing that was able to, lift us out of the sort of subjective reality and towards something closer approximating objectivity
Or collectivism.
or collectivism. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, cool. We're good with that one. Good. Yeah. All right, cool. I'm going to minimize and I'm going to click and then I'm going to go like that because we're talking about Taoism now. Taoism is, I've always actually liked Taoism. I took Taekwondo, so I know a little bit about Taoism. But it offers people a painless way of finding life's meaning through the Wu Wei, or the action without intention, or naturalness. Such actions lead to finding the Tao, which is the way, and yet the way cannot be understood through any explanation or action. The Tao reveals itself only when the person simply is. And I really like that sort of concept. And I coupled that with a quote from Lao Tzu, which was the famous Taoist philosopher. And he said, which I kind of find kind of comical, he says, doing nothing is better than being busy doing nothing. Which I think it's kind of a cute little way of saying, hey man, you're doing too much. And the meaning of life and sort of the I guess the essence or the spirit of life remains in that neutrality zone that Taoism really focuses on, that sort of eye of the storm that's untouched by the surroundings. And so I really like that sort of core philosophy of and it is a little bit weird because the concept of doing nothing is better than being busy doing nothing. It kind of sounds strange, but it, if you think about it, it makes sense. If you're being busy doing nothing, then you might as well be doing nothing, and you might actually enjoy doing nothing more.
I came across the Tao Ching Ching, I believe it's called, at a time in my life when my work schedule started to pick up to 12 hours a day. And I found myself to be more productive when I wasn't forcing things, when I wasn't forcing ideas or any sort of knowledge work. But if you can, and also it pulls you out of that flow state so quickly. You actually try to do stuff. But if you just relaxed and kind of or if I relaxed and just turned off my brain and just went into that effortless action, that no mind sort of space, I found myself to be extraordinarily productive.
Yes.
And you just sort of end up going with the flow on a lot of things. And through that, you're able to catch into this flow state that lasts hours on end. And you don't get that stress dump of oh, I got to do X amount of work in Y amount of time. Oh, whereas you just start the work. You just simply begin.
Yeah, it's kind of like emptying your mind to fill it with the universe's energy, and just allowing your cup to be empty so that it can be filled with the appropriate thing. Because too often, I think that our thoughts, and I think about this, I can the easiest way, and my metaphors are going to be very simplified, ladies and gentlemen. So bear with me. But the best way I can kind of describe it as for me, it's playing pool. The moment I start thinking about my shot is the moment I'm going to screw it up. When I let my mind just be blank, I hit 90% of my shots. But the moment I start to overthink it, I'm almost guaranteed that I'm not going to make that shot. And it's sort of like you said, tapping into that flow state, that no mind state that allows you to almost reach this sort of superhuman ability, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, it's you're right. Like it's really nice. It just feels good. Gamers too have this thing, um, called I think G4 called it the glow back in the day, but it's basically just a flow state. But you see it most in fighting games when people are making these 1/60th of a second reactions because they are they are just flowing with the game and starting to read their opponent.
Right.
And it's beautiful to watch because there's no way that your brain can actively think that quick and then come up with a decision to be made. So it is that effortless sort of action. And then also too, it also sounds like me trying to ask somebody out on a date. They're like, I overthink it, and I'm like, oh, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
Right.
Abort.
Yes, absolutely.
Aw.
The best interpersonal reaction or interactions are the natural ones, the ones that don't have to be forced. Yeah, absolutely. Ayla, you got anything? Taoism?
Taoism. Yeah. I mean, I love Taoism. I love the simplicity and calmness of it. And like Mike said about the flow state, I mean, I definitely co-sign that. Earlier this morning, well, actually, I've been waking up earlier in the morning because it takes away the ability of somebody else to rob me of my intentions for the day. So it was really weird. Like, because of the pandemic, people were texting me for work stuff on Saturday, Sunday, 8 a.m., 7 a.m., 6:30 a.m. And it was getting really out of
9
control.
p.m.
9 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I've just kind of been of the mindset, like, if I wake up at 5 or if I wake up at 7, but I don't look at my phone, because to me, it's unreasonable to expect somebody to respond before 8. So it's really just clients trying to get their task in before everybody else. But, if I can silence all of that and I can start out the day, sitting outside for a minute, listening to the birds, taking a minute to just slow down and not really do anything or think about anything, but, even just like coffee, just waiting for my coffee to brew, not rushing it to brew, not wanting to sweeten it up or like make a fancy foam, not making a thing of it, just quietly waiting. I do find that sets a really nice pace to my day. Now, into the meaning of life, like, if that's a frequency that I'm resonating with, that's something I pay attention to, right? Like, if those moments are the moments that I find the most peace and calm, that's kind of like, well, there's something here. And I think about the natural world, and maybe this gets a little bit into the nature meaning, but you look at animals, you look at trees, you look at plants, there's this quiet harmony. And even though they do have consciousness, it's not this like over consciousness that humans have adapted, because our consciousness protected us and was our source of security for so many years. Being smart protected us from the animal world or the natural world. But I just think that now it's becoming increasingly harder to preserve that. And I don't know if Taoism truly were the meaning of life, why is it that the world has trended so far away from it?
Well, just because something has a meaning doesn't mean people believe it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, because it doesn't make money to to coast on the waves of reality. It makes money to steer those waves and to plant yourself and not be just a leaf in the breeze. You want to dictate where your life goes. And I think that it's just very kind of, we have a very type A nurturing society. So, you got to have a destination. You got to have a point A. You have to have a strict schedule that you adhere to, and you got to answer your phone at 7 a.m. and you got to answer the text message as soon as it comes in at 9 p.m.
Yeah, and
You know what
that's
I mean?
the
And
thing too, is it's like, why are we wired to care about what other people think? Because,
well, we live in a society.
well, yeah,
there goes
no,
the meme.
Not just any society though. This specific, like all of this is extremely localized, right? So, and two, there are probably a lot of people that aren't even familiar with Taoism as a whole, right? So they never come across the idea of effortless action. So to them, everything is always go, 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 like Nick was saying, you know? Otherwise, if they don't fit to that strict schedule, then they think of themselves as a loser. And it becomes that weird American materialistic sort of game.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is like there's two aspects of Taoism that I don't necessarily take issue with, but I've been having trouble reconciling. And so like one of it is if I were to center in, the way and just I guess doing less or being a little bit more I don't know, more in control of my internal flow state, that puts me less at the mercy of others. And so in the sense that like I care what other people think. If I have not so much in like the ego way, but I care if I harm a friend or if I perceive to harm a friend. Like I care about that. That harms me too. And I want to do no harm. But at the same time, there's a certain level of like, I guess, aloofness that maybe I'm putting into this just for myself. But like, I don't know if this isn't resonating or not, but I get this idea that like if I were to just do me and have like a nice meditation practice and set everything out, I'm almost going to be making everyone around me unhappy because I'm not answering their text. I'm not doing their thing. I'm not helping them move. I'm not doing all the things that they want me to do. And I don't know if that's because one, everybody
But if
needs
you
to
were following
participate.
Tao, you would just go with the flow of all of those people. And sometimes you would say yes, and sometimes you would say no.
Well, but
You
what
don't
I was
have to
going to
reject
say,
everything.
but what I was going to say is that my question is, does the adherence of Taoism require everybody else to also be a part, or could you be a Taoist in a completely non-Taoist environment and still be able to hold true to it? I guess that's the question, which is a lot longer of a discussion,
I
but
think you definitely can hold on to it. You're just going to piss some people off, of course, because you're not going to get through. There eventually becomes too many tasks and too few hours in the day, right? But what you can do is pick up a task, however many they come that you feel good with picking up, and work your way through them in your time. And that will piss people off, especially if you are dealing with more successful corporate type people, which might be a bit more on the sociopathic or psychopathic type of side, where they want to leverage your empathy to get their tasks done.
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's definitely not conducive to, I mean, at least our society is not exactly conducive to Taoism. That's why it's not prevalent in America. But it's also, like it isn't a rejection of things. I would say that it's riding the wave of reality. You don't steer, you are being is what Taoism is. It's just you is.
But
You is.
that good old Firefly quote, "I'm a leaf on the wind."
Absolutely.
Yeah, I still take issue with this idea though, because okay, well, I mean, I'm probably going to get really specific, and again to say like I love the idea, and I guess maybe I just take issue because I have been unsuccessful in incorporating a more Taoist perspective, but
You
Hey,
try to do it in a type A manner. That's why.
well, as someone that's incorporated Taoism, I've pissed off a lot of people doing this. So,
Yeah.
like, if you see pissing people off as harming people, you may inherently be more unsuccessful in this sort of thing. But that doesn't mean one can't compartmentalize it to, say, personal tasks or something like that. But it's like you said, there's definitely a lot going on within the group. But if you just do it with a group that's not used to it or just doesn't know about it, yeah, you're gonna piss a lot of people off.
And plus, I
right.
think we can remove this a little bit from the social aspect and just read this line: action without intention is the way. So whatever you're doing it's the concept of Tao is that you're not trying to project any sort of outcome on the thing that you're doing. You're just in the moment of the action and
But
not.
but do you think Taoism is absolutist? So like do you need to have action without intention 24/7 or does it have allowances for when you need to intend to not drive your car off a cliff or something like that? Like
I
know.
just
The
who
goal.
would it intend? Who?
No, I'm
Okay,
just thinking
yeah.
action. Like, I mean, action does require some intention. I mean, I am feeling very type A about this now. Now
When
I'm
you're-
like,
When you drive on autopilot, and like when you're driving and like you're just thinking about other things, and you end
There
up
you
at
go.
the place where you were or a place where you're going, there's no intention being done, right?
that's
It's just
true.
you're just flowing with
You're
the
coasting.
yeah, you're doing the driving. It's all you're doing is the driving.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think it's not as we said, it's probably not as conducive in a sort of Western society for sure, because there are more there are more things on the hierarchy of necessity than just going with the flow. But it is interesting, and it is something that you can integrate in small ways. You don't have to become a Taoist in order to to enjoy the philosophy or utilize it in small ways.
Go big or go home.
Oh,
There's what I find cool about it, where I've integrated it too, is in learning new tasks, right? Because you can't describe the action, you can't describe the way, but there's only one way. But when you pick up and learning new things, you can see where like you start off small, you fail a lot, but you keep going down that road and you don't take in mind of your failures. You kind of not, you accept them as they come. You end up gaining more skill in that specific craft. Then you generalize this to all crafts, and it's sort of the same procedure. But that's where it has helped me a lot, because I've been able to chase down some dreams I wouldn't have otherwise without this sort of integration of Taoism into my life.
It's beautiful.
That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful.
It's
All right.
real beautiful.
Let's move on to our next topic, which is determinism, everybody's favorite.
I love it. My bitter ass loves it.
So determinism happened around the 6th century BC is when the idea first came about. But it's the idea that all events happen as a result of previously existing causes. Since nothing can be changed in a predetermined world, a person cannot have free will. The meaning of life is there is one, is also predetermined, and we cannot do anything to understand it. The idea of determinism is an ancient one, and it's reviving in the mathematics of the 18th century, as well as its representatives in French philosophy. René Descartes was also kind of every time I got to do it in the French accent, but I was moved by this sort of this quote from John Galsworthy, and it just says, "Life calls the tune, we dance." And I think that's probably the most charitable, the most charitable quote for determinism I could find. But the one-liner here is that life cannot be changed and cannot be known, because it is just what it is. And the fact that we don't have an answer for life means that was set in stone a long time ago, and we are never going to get to that point. And obviously I have my critiques of determinism, and I'm sure all of you guys do too, but I do like the quote, "Life calls the tune, we dance." But yeah, what do you guys think? Determinism, we've had this conversation before, so we don't need to focus too much on it.
It's the emo version of Taoism.
It's the emo version of Taoism. Yeah,
that light at the end of the tunnel, that's a train coming your way. That's what that is.
Exactly.
I obviously don't like determinism. I dislike it actually more than like nihilism, because at least in nihilism you can build something afterwards, but determinism is sort of that thing of like, no, well, screw it. You can't change anything. You can just keep going down, your path until it doesn't work or something. Then this even goes further with like the biological reductionists that claim that free will is just biological impulses, when the idea of free will is more centered around more complex decision making. So even that I sort of reject like wholeheartedly.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how determinism isn't a religious philosophy. It would seem like that's like the one of the most religious philosophies that we could have, is this concept that like everything is set in stone. You're just playing out a part in this sort of movie of existence, and there is no changing of anything. And I do know that, you know, we introduced the concept of free will in the more like Judeo-Christian sense, but it does seem oddly like religious in a way.
Yeah, and I guess there's like a certain smugness that comes with it too. Obviously, if you're
Right.
successful, you could be like, "Oh, I was always meant to be successful. This is how
Right.
it is."
Yeah,
And,
totally.
yeah, so that sort of stuff is just kind of silly to me. It's like defeatist. It's a very defeatist idea. Yeah, like Ayla was saying, very emo.
It is for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, and then, you know, obviously we get the concept of no free will, and I think everybody kind of recoils when they hear that concept. And I really think that it's hilarious that people like, you know, vault themselves up as a intellectual by arguing that there's no such thing as free will, and that's something that we can't exactly prove exists, but we all kind of know it does.
Yeah, it's a little silly to me. It's like almost one of those things that's not worth debating unless you absolutely have to try to get the like. So the hardest thing in rhetoric to do is to change your opponent's mind. But I feel like moving people from a deterministic mindset out of that is a uphill battle worth fighting.
I think it's worth fighting too, because I think that people can fall victim to determinism very easily. I think we all can. I think we all get sad on ourselves and think that, oh, this is my lot. This is everything. This always happens to me. This happens every time. You know, I've used that language before, and it's like, now I shouldn't use that language because it's not true. First of all, you know, it doesn't happen to me every time, you know? Yeah. So I think that it's definitely a worthwhile venture to help people out of determinism, but it's not an easy one.
No, not at all. It's like you have to introduce like incremental changes, right? It's a battle that can be back and forth. So like one step forward, two steps back, sort of thing. But as long as like if you're walking, running, or crawling somewhere, at least you're headed towards somewhere. And determinism prevents any sort of the crawling, walking, or running steps.
Right. No context.
Yeah, just I don't know. Get it out of here. I don't want to look at it anymore.
Get it out of here. Ayla, what do you got?
Well, I mean, I'm definitely kind of your mindset. Like, I believe free will is a thing, and even if it's not a thing, I believe that we have to believe that it's a thing, because if you think that everything is just determined, it removes the drive to change your fate, so to speak. And you know, like you said too, like it can make those that are really, I don't know, given good fates to believe that they deserve them somehow, you know, like
or excuse people for their bad behavior.
Exactly. I'm thinking of that. Manifest destiny, you know, that's a classic example that was used to say, oh, well, we deserve all these things, we're just going to murder all these people because God says it so, or the world says it so. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
it was pre-written.
Yeah, like, you know, determinism, it can be used very poorly. But to play devil's advocate, I do really love, you know, brain science and some of the stuff that's been coming out in the research about the way our brains work. And you know, I think free will still exists, of course, but I do feel like there is a lot of influence that we're under. So I can see where determinism can get footholds in philosophers' minds, and can seem like something. But again, too, like as a meaning of life kind of thing, like, well, what's the point of that? Right? What's the point of all of the stuff that happens, especially because it's mostly trends bad? Like, what's the point?
That's why it's argued that it cannot be known, right? Because if it hasn't been revealed to us yet, it's not going to be revealed to us because it was destined to not be something that we know.
It gets close to the theism thing where, you know, it's like, stop worrying about this and just make coffee.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Absolutely.
The emo
the emo version.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Make my coffee and cry in it.
Emotheism. Not to be mistaken for Elmotheism. That's a totally different thing.
Oh, hell
Oh,
no.
Elmo.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to the next one, shall we? We got Confucianism. Confucianism is an interesting one. I was looking up through a lot of quotes by Confucius. He was a pretty prolific dude. But obviously, he's a Chinese philosopher from 551 to 479 BC. And he tells us to cultivate virtue called Ren, which is an altruistic sort of feeling one experiences when taking care of one's children and parents. One of many ways Confucius explained this virtue is this, and I quote, "Now the man of perfect virtue, wishing to be established himself, seeks also to establish others. Wishing to be enlarged himself, he seeks also to enlarge others. To be able to judge of others what is nigh in ourselves. This may be called the art of virtue." And the sort of one-liner for this one is Confucianism, family piety is the truest expression of meaning. And I think that there's needs to be a qualifier with that. And I would say that it's the spirit in which you love for your family or the people close to you. Some people don't necessarily have a biological family, but they have a made family. And I think that this still rings true. So don't get hung up too much on this familial moniker, because I do believe that you can substitute community for the same thing if you wanted to. But it's this the spirit of compassion between family members is in essence the greatest thing that life has to offer. And I thought that was really beautiful. And I have another quote by Confucius, and he says, "Life is really simple, but we insist on making it complicated." But yeah, I kind of like this concept of like the essence of life, or this qualia that we're searching for is within the relationships we have with our loved ones. I think that that's kind of a really beautiful sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds nice. My worry though is like when, it gets a little bit corrupted when the word familial gets replaced for like the state, right? Like state piety is the truest expression of meaning or something like that. That's where whoever is kind of controlling it can take advantage. But there's a really beautiful feeling when, you help out your grandparents or you cook your folks a meal or something like that. Or, you buy some beers for your friends. There's always that great feeling of community, but it can be preyed upon, I think, in a more rigid system, especially when you start to throw around like the piety thing, right? Because now we've gotten extremely rigid.
No, I definitely agree. I think that if you try to substitute familial / maybe chosen family with something else, then you're going to be able to create some sort of totalitarian system. So definitely we want to make sure that we avoid that type of sentiment. But I do believe that there is something intrinsically true about this wellspring of emotion that we give to our loved ones and our loved ones give to us. And there's something energetically true about that being the material of reality in a sense, or one of the threads of the blanket of reality. Yeah,
like I would agree. You can definitely create threads of meaning for life through this, especially with that sense. Family's always been much more than blood, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah. And that can give you the good feels.
All the good feels. Yeah, Ayla. Anything?
Oh yeah. I could probably say a lot about it, but I would just say that when those relationships are good, then I can see the meaning of life resonating. But enter complications or even the lack of maybe societal support for those familial obligations, then you're creating kind of a recipe for not so good feelings.
Yeah, altruism can be abused quite easily.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
There's
And if
always going to
you
be exception
say
to any of these rules. So I don't know if
true,
we have to necessarily state the exceptions every time, but I get what you mean. Yeah.
oh yeah. I mean, I just feel like, yeah, if you're trying to come up with the meaning of life, it is so beautiful to tether it to others, but at the same time, um, I mean, just think how devastating it would be. Would you want to and be unable to? And I think that's where, if it were the one meaning of life, wouldn't it be easier? I don't know. I don't know. I mean,
No, because nobody said that life is supposed to be easy. I mean,
no, I
I
know.
don't know. Have you talked to the determinists?
yes, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's a tough thing to stake everything on others. It belies a lot of trust and
I
love
don't
and
necessarily, if you're
support.
staking anything on others, it's saying that the energetic spirit that happens between you and a loved one is the meaning of life. It's the thing that
Okay,
you share with a loved one is the meaning.
so it's a
You
love.
know? Yeah, absolutely. It's love. It's the things that you do for your loved ones. Whether it's cooking a meal, like Mike said, or buying a beer for your friends, or it's that generosity of spirit. It's that thing that we do to express the caring that we have for each other. That's the core
Mm,
sort of essence of life.
I see. I see.
Which, like you guys have said, which is very true, it can be exploited very easily because altruism is sort of a meek quality and doesn't necessarily stand up for itself.
Hugs and nugs. That's
Hugs
all
and
I'm
nugs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on. I got Confucianism done, and now we're going to Moism. Moism is kind of the same, a little bit, except for Moism comes from Mozi, who is also a Chinese philosopher, I believe. Yes, a Chinese philosopher from 470 BC. And the purpose, the Mohists' purpose, the concept of inclusive love, or jian I, a kind of impartial care for fellow human beings that includes everyone in society. The meaning of life is in following the model called Fa, in which one's psychological state of care and the beneficial behavior that results from it are two sides of the same coin. So yeah, I don't know too much about Mosey. I tried to read a little bit, but it does seem that the core philosophy is to love impartially and to pursue love in its fullest. And perhaps it's sort of an antiquated philosophy for a more gentle time. But there's a quote from Mosey that I wanted to share. And it says that if there is no mutual love between people, a mutual hatred will arise. And I think to certain levels that is true. I don't know if we have to love everybody, but I do like the spirit that it's trying to invoke. I think it's impossible to love everybody impartially, but it is something that you could strive for, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Sounds like it could be an HR nightmare, though.
Seriously, right?
But it's important to strive for love all the time, and I'd like to think of, you're right, you can't love everybody, right? But even the people you hate, that is to me the same. That's just the underworld of love. It's the same sort of emotion that drives you to irrational behavior. Right? So even if you hate somebody, in reality, you kind of love them, because if you're not going to just let anybody drive you to that sort of thinking and behavior, right?
Yeah, only two types of people would live rent free in your head: the ones you love and the ones you hate.
Yeah, and so it ends up, I think, being the same base thing, if I can, talking from an abstraction point of view. But no, I really do like the idea of loving everybody impartially and live and let live and that sort of stuff. We're all stuck on this spinning spaceship until we've either fly into the sun or it explodes, right? So you might as well make things easier on your fellow human than try to make things harder.
Definitely. And it's something that I kind of respect. I don't know if I ever have the fortitude of doing so. I try my best, but obviously I'm not exactly like giving hugs to everybody I meet and, being encouraging and doing stuff like that. But there is something within that spirit of like, I kind of think of it as like, giving a stranger encouragement. Having that sense of mind to know that somebody on the bus is having a bad day and may need an ear, and it is something that is kind of nice to aim towards, but wholly impractical because it relies on other people to play fair, and most of the time that doesn't happen.
But sort of so yeah, I mean it doesn't happen, but especially with the downtrodden, it's little small impartial gifts of comfort, just helpful words, like you were saying, right? Like granting the stranger on the bus an ear, even telling somebody to keep their head up when they're always looking down at the ground. Those little, it just shows a semblance of human compassion when in their day they may have not experienced it.
Yes, and that is incredibly important. Yes, I definitely agree. You don't know what your tiny actions might mean to somebody, so it is good to assume that everything that you do, if done through love, will have an impact in some way, hopefully positively, on your surrounding environment.
Yeah,
at least we would hope so.
One would hope.
Ayla.
I don't have anything more to add to that. You guys covered that one beautifully.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, we're going to move on then. Let's see. Stupid thing. Okay. And then we're going to get into one that we've already kind of covered before, so we won't have to spend too much time on it, but it's the good old solipsism, right? And this appeared around the 5th century BC. Solipsism is the theory that only one can be certain about one thing, one's own mind. Solipsism was first recorded by the Greek sophist Gorgias, who reported to have said, "Nothing exists. Even if something exists, nothing can be known about it. And even if something could be known about it, knowledge about it can't be communicated to others." And the meaning of life, according to solipsism, can only be known by one's mind and not in relation to other beings. Some psychologists believe that newborns to be initially solipsistic. Infants cry in the absence of their parents nearby because they believe that when not visible, the parents stop existing. Eventually, children learn that observing others to reject solipsism. But the tagline here is only you know the meaning of life. And I kind of find that a little bit true. And I found this quote from Ursula K. Le Guin, which I think is a pretty good one. She says, "My imagination makes me human and it makes me a fool. It gives me all the world and exiles me from it." And, I think we've had a conversation about solipsism before. So ladies and gentlemen, if you want to hear a longer conversation about that, please go check out our episode on solipsism. But would you guys have anything to add there? I do think there is a certain level of truth that only you will know the meaning of life, because perhaps there is a subjectivity to the meaning of life. I don't know if there is an objective meaning of life, but it would certainly seem that in the pursuit of knowing that meaning, if you are in that pursuit, only you are really going to find the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think maybe the babies had it right. Maybe we all don't exist and we don't see our people. Like,
Right.
you're in another room. I can't see you.
That's right.
I've
Maybe I don't exist.
learned to accept that you are there and you exist and you'll come back. But I mean,
Yeah, no, that's fair.
like, is it the same you?
looks even better. I'm just a AI. Mike doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm only here to guide you to your meaning of life.
Yes, to find your meaning of life. Yeah, I think we all know this one is kind of silly. It makes for good woe speculation talk, but I think that taking the solipsistic sort of meaning of life is probably correct in the idea that it is subjective, but it isn't correct in the idea that only you have the answer to it. So, yeah. Anybody got it? Yeah.
I do kind of enjoy though, like the inherent subjectivity, right? Like,
Mhm.
the only one that's going to know your meaning of life is you, and you probably won't even be able to describe it in a symbolic language that we know right now.
Yes, yes, and that gets to the kind of the crux of solipsism too, is the inability to communicate experience properly, or in a way that would equally let the other person experience it. They'll never experience what you're describing at the same level that you experienced it, because it happened to you. So yeah, there is some interesting stuff about it for sure. Ayla, you got anything? You're just gonna keep passing.
No, I mentioned the baby thing.
Oh, yes. Okay. So the baby thing. Got it. Yeah, I think we can move on from solipsism if you guys are okay with that.
Ayla, do you think like quantum theory builds like is Nick just Schrodinger's Nick? He only exists when you look at him, and then he's just gone.
It's possible. It's possible. No, I mean, I think it's just one of those weird things where it's like okay. How? No, I mean, no, this is just an impossible thing to talk about, because I mean, like, I can take it to a very like simple level, which is just like all the volumes of books in the world, right? Like, if I'm the only thing that existed or created or made all this up or whatever, like, how the hell did I make all these books that I don't even understand when I read them the first time? So,
Yeah, of course. It's
there's
very easy to refute.
But fun to play with.
And I mean, from like a meaning of life perspective, okay. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I just don't really.
Maybe you've made all these various philosophies and meanings of life, and you're trying to figure out which one it is.
Trust me, if I made this reality, there would be so many more amusement parks. Skittles would be like a right. There'd just be Skittles and sugary things everywhere. So yeah.
Fair enough.
All right. Very good. All right. Let's move on. We're going to get into one of Mike's favorites, the cynicism. And the tagline here is self-sufficiency is the goal. Cynicism is around from the 4th century BC, and the Cynics attempted to offer people the possibility of happiness and freedom from suffering in the age of uncertainty. The meaning of life is mental lucidity and self-sufficiency. To achieve self-sufficiency, a person must become free from external influences, such as wealth, fame, and power. There is no central authority on cynicism or any official doctrine, yet it was influential tradition in ancient Greece. And so I had to pull a quote from one of the fathers of cynicism, Diogenes of Sinope. And he says that it is not that I am mad. It is only that my head is different from yours. And while this doesn't exactly capture the entire ethos of the concept of cynicism, I do think that there is kind of a jab there in Diogenes basically saying, well, like I've developed myself to a certain level that you just can't get up on. My head is different from yours. And so he could be talking about subjectivity as well, but cynicism definitely has a strong leaning on self-reliance and improving self-sufficiency as the best way to honor life, basically. And I think that is kind of a direct sort of sentiment. This honoring of life is to try to improve upon yourself to the best of your ability.
Yeah, I mean, Ayla, would you want to go first? Because I could go on and on about cynicism.
I know. I mean, like, I respect cynicism, in terms of it being like a meaning of life kind of thing. I think having a keen mind and just being a little bit discerning in your understanding of the world could definitely be akin to what I was talking earlier about in terms of like the meaning of life being to know or to learn, I mean, like, to me, cynicism is up there with like pragmatism. And pragmatism to me has been a really beautiful philosophy because it does unite previously conflicting theories in a beautiful compatibilist way. advocating a sense of harmony, which I think any type of ethos should, it should have an element of, harmony and grounding and peace. And I think that can be found with these rungs of like cynic thought and stoicism and these kind of more like rigid, you know, aesthetic lifestyles.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be that rigid, right? Like I enjoy the
No.
punchy nature of cynicism. Like their wit is amazing. Like they have the quickest wits in the ancient world, and I've always found that enjoyable. And I do enjoy like you said, like kind of building this compatibilist point of view because we were looking back at some of the earlier meanings where it's like love impartially, these sorts of things. It's all great, but what are you going to do when you come across somebody that is either trying to take advantage of you or somebody that is trying to influence you to do their bidding, which may not exactly, I guess, be being taken advantage of? So you can develop these layers of intelligence, of self-sufficiency, and use that cynical wit against people. It's helped me steer myself away from caring about the opinions of others because that form of slavery is arguably the worst form of slavery. It's the silliest. Yeah, and incorporate different stoic things, but that I guess they can be seen as a little bit rigid, but it does allow. It's rigid in the material sense, I guess.
I think a better word maybe, and Ayla, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but regimented. This concept of at least what I'm seeing when I'm reading this over again is the meaning of life is a mental lucidity and self-sufficiency. That to me reads as sort of a regimented type of person.
Yeah. Only eat when you absolutely have to. Only have the minimal amount of clothes, which in the most minimal case is just one pair, right? And doing these things will allow for self-sufficiency and the getting the closest back to our natural form.
Yeah. Well, and it's worth mentioning that cynicism grew out of it's called the Hellenistic philosophies, and under that you also have Epicureanism, Stoicism, and skepticism. One of those is lumped with the other. It's thought of as three. I don't know why I'm thinking of four, but yeah, I think that with the Greeks, there's a recognition that all humans inherently have different proclivities, and this, like you meet people throughout your life, and some are a little bit more carefree and convivial and social and wandery. Others are a little bit more 9 to 5 or studious, and you have others that maybe fall on either side, but in their actions they behave in a way that might be more along the lines of the cynicism side of things, or a stoic kind of side of things, versus the Epicurean, who's a little bit more about pleasures and things like that. So I think, yeah, with this one, it's kind of interesting because I think they all have their merits, but I also still feel like they're part of a unifying acknowledgement of what it is to be human. Like if you lean on one side, there's still the pull of these other impulses.
Of course. Blends really well with Taoism too.
Definitely, it definitely does. All right, let's keep going because we got another one of Mike's favorites coming up, and that would be hedonism.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Great photo selection, by the way, Nick. I'm enjoying these.
And the tagline here is "Pursue pleasure, avoid suffering."
Yeah.
And this appeared around the 4th century BC. The idea was formulated by the Greek philosopher Democritus, Democritus, in the 4th century BC. And it says that it offers us a life based on seeking pleasure and avoiding suffering. Simple pleasures like eating, dancing, and playing music are meaningful in of themselves. Hedonism, yes, by the Democritus, yes. And I found a funny quote here from Ursula K. Le Guin again. And she says, which is better off, a lizard basking in the sun or a philosopher?
The lizard.
Yes, exactly. And a hedonist would argue that the lizard is better off because it is fulfilling its desires and its impulses, and it's doing that in the moment instead of perhaps living more cerebrally and thinking about the morality of each action that one makes.
Hold on. What about a philosopher basking in the sun?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're Greek, you probably get a really good tan. But if you're, like, I don't know how Nietzsche would do in the sun.
That's fair. All right, basking in the clouds.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, absolutely. In the overcast. Yeah.
I guess it depends if his sister is there. Oh,
snap!
Now we got well, you might be into it.
Yeah,
sick burn.
But there's something that I kind of appreciate about hedonism. There's an ecstasy in the pursuit of pleasure, and there's definitely an energetic deluge when you finally find that pleasure. But it does become a dragon, I think, that you can chase for the rest of your life and perhaps waningly catch it.
Oh yeah. I mean, right now we live probably in the most hedonistic times, right? I could walk out my door and then there's 7 different restaurants that represent 4 different continents. From, I could just walk in and order my food and pay with this thing called money, and I have this food that, thousands of years before somebody would have to travel months to even get the ingredients.
Right. Yeah.
I can walk into a Rite Aid and look at 20 different brands of toilet paper and figure out which one I want.
This year.
Right, this year. Like the simplest of pleasures, right? But it builds more, going even towards like the carnal pleasures, going towards drugs, partying, drinking, that it becomes a thing where it never becomes enough.
Right.
And that's where, in the cynic sense of being able to avoid that until the point where you absolutely feel like you need to have it. In the simplest case, starving, right? I don't eat for 2 days, 3 days. I go out and I go grab food from that one of those many restaurants. That's going to be the best meal I ever had.
Yep.
So it's where both of these things can balance each other.
Absolutely. And I think that that's probably the only way to helpfully enjoy hedonism, is that you have long spates of denial. Because like you said, it has a lot of diminishing returns. Each and every time you tap into that well, there's less water.
Yeah. And ethical hedonism, I think, is a good thing to pursue. Like, enjoy that pleasure. Just make sure it doesn't come at the cost of social relationships. Ideally.
Definitely. Yeah. Ayla?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree with what all of you are saying. I think where my eye draws is the second clause, where it's saying avoid suffering. Which I think is such an interesting wording, because, if you look at other philosophies, suffering is an accepted truism of our existence. For hedonism to be the thing, the vehicle that avoids that at all costs, yeah, it does seem like you're you're in the class that is life, and you're ditching to get a pizza. You know what I mean?
You're plugging your ears and going la 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 la. I can't hear you.
Right.
What if suffering is pleasure to you, though?
Then you have the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Damn, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a really good one. I don't know how to answer that, but I definitely feel like, going back to the concept of values,
I feel like so many different groups of people have noted that pleasure doesn't inherently have value, or it does, but it's not a value that people respect. Like, imagine if there was a group of people today who did go out and eat every night and were like, no, but this is what I'm supposed to do. And like I don't know, like, we're just like in your face about it. And I'm sure maybe those people do exist, but it just seems like there's not enough substance to make it as good as it could be. And I think that's the thing, where it's like it presents a duality and it says one is better than the other. And I think that to have a good meaning of life answer, you need something that encompasses the whole pie, not just one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unless you derive pleasure from pain, then
And you're
it's a
saying,
party.
be the hedonist.
Walking
Grey's
around just
or
beating
is it
yourself.
50 Shades
Yeah.
of Grey kind of stuff there.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Sure, somewhere there's some cynic that believes that.
Probably. All right, shall I move on? You guys
Yeah.
got anything? Okay, cool. All right, moving on. We are getting to Platonism. Platonism? Platonism. Platopotamus. I don't know.
Platonism?
Platonism. There we go. Around the 4th century BC, from obviously the great Greek philosopher Plato. And he said that the meaning of life is the pursuit of knowledge. In his book Apology, Plato quotes his teacher Socrates by saying that the unexamined life is not worth living. In a nutshell, Platonism is the idea that there exists such a thing as pure forms, which are abstractions. An abstraction is something that neither exists in time nor space. It is completely non-physical, and yet it is knowable. Knowledge of pure forms is the meaning of life. Daunting as this sounds, there is a shortcut of sorts. According to Plato, we are all born with all knowledge inside of us, but we have to recall it and rediscover it, which is a concept called anamnesis. Anamnesis. Thank you. Darn those Greeks and their words. Anamnesis. That's what it's called. And of course, I couldn't talk about Platonism without a quote from Plato. So it goes as follows. And the tagline, of course, being the pursuit of knowledge above all else. And the quote says, "Excellence is not a gift, but a skill that takes practice. We do not act rightly because we are excellent. In fact, we achieve excellence by acting rightly." And I thought that was kind of a nice little concept. And it's to me, that's a pretty profound concept for, a dude that was around 2,000 years ago. I like this concept of, we don't act rightly because we are excellent. We're exhibiting excellence by acting rightly. And so I think that takes a lot of the weight off, because so many times I think people expect that they have to just be this thing, instead of realizing that it's the decisions that you make that allow you to be that thing. It's like you can't just name yourself a painter without picking up a paintbrush. And so you have to act out these ideas in order to become the idea.
Yeah, there's a really great. Sorry, did you want to go, Mike?
No, go ahead, Ayla.
Okay, there's this philosopher. She's a contemporary one, so she just did a TED Talk recently. And she was talking, and I'm sorry if I already mentioned this in another episode, but it was a really cool concept that I think aligns here. She talks about difficult choices and the process of decision making. And she said that along those lines, that your choices end up defining who you are. And it was a really beautiful and powerful talk because, and I think it cuts back into the value things too. If you're torn between two things, kind of like a catch-22, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, or both paths are unpleasant or whatever, that when deciding those, you and your decisions and your actions are going to make up the person that you will be. And I think that that was a really cool thing because, in here it's this pursuit of knowledge, but it's also like in what you were saying in that quote, your actions end up becoming the knowledge that lets you
Mhm.
know yourself and your
Yes.
life, and that gives meaning to your life, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, it's definitely not necessarily just a scholastic knowledge. It's experiential knowledge. It's the knowledge of philosophy in action as well.
And I think action might be the bridge in which knowledge becomes wisdom. Right? Like you don't have to worry about your title. You don't have to worry about anything like that. If you just simply do the thing, yeah, then it removes all that weight, and you at a certain point you don't have to make decisions anymore, right? Because you are that thing. I think there is a danger with this though. So as like in my romantic relationships, I really enjoyed like having a mind mate, being able to intellectually talk with somebody. But there comes a point where if I feel like I've extracted all the knowledge out of the person, I'm bored and I'm done. And I think that that's more on the vicious side of Platonism, Platonism.
Platypus. Yes.
Platypus, yeah. So like, one can definitely covet knowledge, become a dragon of knowledge. I guess become hedonistic in knowledge, especially if you, like me, I take great pleasure in pursuing knowledge, even if it doesn't make any money or anything like that, right?
Yes.
But so that's where I can see one danger, but it does take the weight off of life. In like, I have to become this thing. I have to become, this thing, but I'm not doing anything to become the thing. Just simply do the thing, and the knowledge and wisdom from doing the thing will turn you into that thing. I like that.
Yeah. Well, and definitely the pleasure of knowledge is definitely in this as well. And we'll get to that very soon. But Ayla, did you want to add anything to the Platonism?
No.
Platonism?
Platypus, I'm good.
Plip-ploplinism. Okay, cool. We'll move on to the next one, which is legalism. Legalism.
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know, right? I have a feeling we're all gonna skip this one.
I always go to the lawyer in Jurassic Park. Like that totally colored my opinion of lawyers. Sorry to any lawyers out there, but poor guy.
legalism.
I know.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just going to start. So legalism is the concept of being a value to the state, and that really is just the ultimate goal that you can have as a human is to be the best citizen you can be. This comes from China from the 4th century, and it says that legalists believe that humans are inherently selfish and cannot be trusted to behave morally. A strong government system can steer humans to continue behaving in their selfish ways while the system also as a whole benefits from their work. The meaning of life is then in the acquisition of skills to make a person's work valuable to the state, which turns benefit to society. And yes, let's see, the quote that I got on legalism is a kind of a critique, but it's from Jen Wilkin, and it says, while legalism builds self-righteousness, lawfulness builds righteousness. Obedience to the law is the means of sanctification for the believer. And that kind of just wraps up the philosophy of legalism, is that this concept of being the ultimate citizen, the most productive person for your governing body. I do think that there's a sort of what is this? Is it Calvinist is it Calvinist that believed that all humans were evil, or that was Thomas Hobbes? That was Thomas Hobbes, right?
No, I don't know.
I think so. I think Thomas Hobbes was the one that believed that humans were just inherently evil and that we needed a strong hand to to govern. But legalism would carry on that same sort of sentiment that humans can't be trusted, and therefore they do need a strong government system that can steer their selfish ways to a productive end. And as nasty as that sounds, there is a little bit of truth in that. And I don't know if we want to recognize the truth in that, but
hold on.
All right, go ahead.
Who runs the legal system, man?
The state, man.
Who's the state, man? Is it humans?
Just more people. Yeah.
That are inherently selfish. So
yes.
Then what
the state is inherently selfish. Oh my God. We're twisting ourselves in knots.
Then you need a government to govern the government. But
yes.
Who governs the government?
Who watches the watchers, man?
Yeah.
Seriously. Yeah, I figured that this one was going to get glossed over pretty easily because I believe that it's kind of absurd that the only summation of man is to be a good little cog in the wheel. I think that we all share that sentiment. But Ayla, do you have anything to add?
Well, yeah. So you were right. It was Hobbes, and
okay.
I'm reading this little description here from Google, and it says Hobbes also considers humans to be naturally vainglorious, and so seek to dominate others and demand their respect. So he thinks humans are inherently evil and they need to be controlled in order to mitigate that.
Right, which I got from. Which I only knew because of Calvin and Hobbes, because Hobbes was modeled after Thomas Hobbes.
That's pretty awesome. I never knew that.
Yeah, he hated humans. He thought they were useless.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I need to read those comics again.
Yeah.
But no, I think you're right. Like, this one's kind of easy to gloss over, but I would say that it makes me think of those who think about posterity. And so, seeing the value of effort now to propel the future of humanity down the road, so like space exploration, for example, we will never probably see the terraforming of an exoplanet, but if we work hard today, future generations might have the opportunity to have multiple planets. And what would that look like in terms of increasing resources and food and comfort and health and well-being and all that kind of stuff? So I see merit in it. I think though
it just ignores humanity.
Well, it just puts us in a perpetual state of working towards an end that we're never going to see. And I think that's a hard sell.
Yes.
It's a hard sell.
Absolutely. That's fair.
Too, I kind of see this. It can be useful when one lacks, moral grounding of their own, right? Like being able to point to a law and say, you can't do this because of this law. Your actions are therefore, immoral, or you're evil, or what have you, or selfish. But it's like a religious thing too, right? Like you only point to that when it's like, no, what you're doing is in some sense immoral. So it provides that same sort of framework, but in this case, instead of having God, it's the state.
Yes, we just we just took I think we were saying that there was a danger in one of the other systems, that would have the state take the place of the ultimate, the top of the hierarchy.
No, what country did this come from again?
I don't know. No comments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe
all right, we're gonna move on.
Sky Daddy.
Sky Daddy. Sky Daddy. I'm sure it did. All right.
Some seafaring nation made this up.
Yeah. All right, let's get into Epicureanism, because we were kind of touching on that with a little bit of this, the concept of hedonism. Epicureanism is the pursuit of pleasure, but it says the ultimate sustainable pleasure is knowledge, or the cultivation of mental pleasure. So Epicureanism would kind of direct itself towards mental stimulation over physical stimulation. And it comes from the Greek philosopher Epicurus from the 4th century. Man, a lot of these philosophers came from the 4th century. Something was going on during that century.
Fall of the Persian Empire, I think.
Yeah,
Alexander
that's true.
the Great.
Mm-hmm.
Diogenes just resting in the sun, telling Alexander to get the hell out of his way.
Laying with the lizard.
Yeah, like with the lizard.
So Epicurus was a materialist in the ancient Greek philosopher who offered that the meaning of life was in achieving sustainable pleasure, which leads to a state of tranquility and freedom from fear. What sort of pleasures are meaningful? Mental, not physical, because mental pleasures exist in the past, the present, and the future, while physical pleasures are fleeting. And the quote that I got for this was actually from Francis Bacon. He said, "For all knowledge and wonder, which is the seed of knowledge, is an impression of pleasure itself." And so I think that kind of holds the Epicurean ethos pretty well. It's sort of this pursuit of pleasure, but in this mental stimulation of pleasure that whatever that might take in your life, whether as long as it's a mental pleasure, it's going to live with you forever, whereas physical pleasure doesn't stick around for long enough.
Yeah, I mean, even material pleasure doesn't stick around that long, too, right? I'd agree, but that this comes with a danger too, because if I find it mentally stimulating to belittle people, right, and I just go around the world belittling a bunch of people, obviously it might be pleasurable to me, but not beneficial to the wider group,
right?
So I think they're like much like hedonism, much like Platonism, even cynicism. There needs to be a bit of a moderation with this, and
right. It can be antisocial in some ways.
Yeah, and even in a social sense too. Like if I just get all my pleasure from extracting knowledge from people over whatever they do or various things, that's also going to be a somewhat selfish life, which I don't think is the best life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that there would be, I think that there would have to be some sort of moral framework in which you allow Epicureanism, just like hedonism and all this stuff to play out in your life. Because yes, it can definitely go too far. And the pursuit of pleasure is incredibly subjective. And just because somebody would be finding it pleasurable to harm another person doesn't mean that it should happen. So, there's definitely loopholes that could be exploited if not taken with a moral framework.
But I would agree that as far as sustainability goes, it is definitely pleasurable to stock up those knowledge tokens over just about anything else.
Yeah,
so you built the greatest wealth of wisdom.
Yes, and if you can go back to those knowledge tokens at any point, you can theoretically have an unlimited amount of pleasure, I guess, assuming that those don't have diminishing returns.
Hey, if you got unlimited tokens, just keep feeding
That's
that
right. Yeah, exactly. Ayla, what do you think about Epicureanism?
I am a little bit of a fan. Mostly because when I think of Epicureanism, I think of the colloquial word Epicurean, or Epicurean delights. And what comes to mind for me is like snooty pleasures. So like, let's say I like cheese, right? That's in the hedonism camp. But to me, Epicureanism is like fromage or like a specific type of cheese, an aged cheese of 10 years. It's like its emphasis on pleasures of the mind rather than just physical pleasures. So it's not so much about the taste of the cheese. It's my understanding of every other type of cheese and the history of the cheese, my appreciation of the making of the cheese. And I think that like in some ways that makes a little bit of sense. I could be a hedonist and drink Bud Light all night, which Bud Light's not terrible, but it's definitely not like some of the brew beers that you might taste, or kombucha beers, or a fine aged red wine or whiskey or something like that. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of cool. And to me, personally, I am much more of a quality over quantity kind of person, and it makes me think of The Office and the Finer Things Club. You know, and to me, there's kind of some hope in that too, because it also seems like hedonism is a quantity thing, whereas this is the quality thing. And you know, I think the more you cultivate the quality refinements and experiences of life, you actually can derive more joy. It might not be that you're eating these fancy things all the time, but when you do, you can appreciate it, and there's an enhancement of the mind. And you know, I mean, just talk to like a professional chef who like they live, breathe, and eat food and tastes and everything like that. You know, they're living their life through this incredible lens. And whether that's right or wrong, or for everybody, is debatable, of course. But I do think that it does have some merit in some situations.
Are you saying geeks and nerds are just Epicureans in disguise?
Oh
Love
yeah,
it.
absolutely. Of course. I mean,
Yeah, we fixate on something for sure.
Yeah, I like that. I think that there's definitely some merit to the pleasure of mental stimulation. However you may take that. Hopefully, you take that in a morally responsible way. But you know, like I think there is something that is quite quite lovely about the cherishment of a piece of knowledge, or the cherishment of an experience. The mental stimulation that you might get from that, like, you know, playing a game of chess with a friend, you know, that you haven't seen in a really long time. Like that would be a very good Epicurean sort of experience. Yeah, so I think that there's definitely a place for it, but you know, like Mike said, there's always loopholes that we need to be careful of.
Yeah,
Isn't a
well,
debate?
yeah.
Debate, it's like a nice,
Yeah,
intimate
absolutely.
Epicurean experience.
Well, and one thing I like too is like in the case of chess, for example, you might not have to play chess with your friend every single day. You might not even get the opportunity to do so. But, you know, with this quote, the ultimate sustainable pleasure is knowledge. You can be thinking about your next chess move. You could be
Yeah.
reading books about chess. You could be watching The Queen's Gambit and thinking about talking about the movie with your friend when you play chess, you know? Like there's so much enjoyment to come from thinking about the things that we enjoy. And I think that might be at the heart too of the Epicureans kind of ethos.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
This episode brought to you by
Epicureans. All right, let's move on to the next one. Next one is kind of an enigma. It's called quietism. Now, I've been trying to research this concept for a while, and really the catch line is, because quietism seems to be hung up on linguistics. What do you mean by meaning and life? Because the quietism came around the 3rd century, and quietists believe that philosophy as such has no answers to offer. Instead, its role is in pointing out linguistic confusions in the questions presented to the philosophers. Thus, the question of the meaning of life assumes that we understand the meaning of the words meaning and life. Any attempt to pin down the meaning of either word reveals the meaninglessness of the question, and thus the meaning of life cannot be understood by asking such questions. Elements of quietism are found in both Eastern and Western philosophies, with Taoism known for its reluctance to use language, and the Greek Pyrrhonism, embracing nonverbal suspension of judgment. So quietism actually is kind of a mystery. I wasn't even able to find a quote about quietism, but it is this concept that the more you start to think about something, the more the farther it gets from you, the farther your understanding. It's kind of does tap into that Taoism of like no mind, like the fact that you're even trying to contextualize the question of what the meaning of life is into words makes you lose something that was a part of the question. The fact that you're trying to put linguistic characters on a concept that you feel makes you lose something in the question. Therefore, the question becomes invalid. It's kind of frustrating, but what do you guys think?
I love it.
Yeah, it is so cerebral. I knew you would love it. And it's like thinking itself in circles.
A little little bit, but also not, because it has a really good point, like you, Nick. I've known you a little over 10 years now.
Yeah.
And yet when I call you by your name, I know who you are. And as somebody who knows you also for like 2 years or something, if they also hear that name, they know who you are. But they don't really know. And I think that there's gradations in knowing, and there's gaps in the words that we use. And I often wonder if the words that we use are limiting our understanding of our universe. Because, like, there is a small percentage of the population that thinks in images.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to chat with someone like that. Because I mean, I don't know. I don't know how I think. Like, if you had to observe how you think, that's a really curious thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and
It
then,
is, yeah.
and then imagine that you were not taught language. Just imagine, how would that shape your understanding of your surroundings? And think about like Eskimos. They're in snowy areas. There's like that common knowledge thing where they have like so many words for snow and weather
Mm-hmm.
compared to other people who don't live in snowy areas. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's just interesting to what degree our surroundings drive our language, and how our language then limits our understanding of our surroundings, which is just fascinating.
Yeah, it definitely makes you feel like, all right, well, I guess I'll just shut up and die then. You know what I mean? It's like,
Damn.
it's
Okay,
like, all
yeah.
right, fine. I'm sorry for asking such a stupid question. You know what I mean? Like, like,
I
all
hear
right,
that.
fine. You're too smart. I get it. Meaning, life. What does it all mean? Okay.
It's like the answer you give at a party.
Yeah. To impress a girl.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like, really, man, it's all about the context of the linguistics. What do we really have to inspect the idea of meaning and what is life but this impulse and desire. It's like, okay, come on.
Oh, well, and there's that movie, Arrival, that like
Mhm.
blew my brain because I was like watching it, and then they're talking about just that, about how language can inform your understanding of reality. And in fact, by adopting this new octopod language or whatnot, they were able to like time travel somehow, or like they had all these weird superpowers because the way that they understood the nature of the world, which is just like such a like crazy thought rabbit hole to jump through.
Mhm. Yeah. No, it is very interesting. The idea of how, linguistic things, our language is even flawed and describing. But I do think that the mastery of self is to try to communicate your thoughts and feelings in the most accurate way. So I don't know. I feel like quietism can be a little bit defeatist in this sense, where it's like, well, you're never really going to accurately describe what your concept is, so don't even try.
I think it's closer to solipsistic. Like you be able to think it out, right? Whether it be through visualizations or through like these constrained symbolic languages, but only you would know exactly. And even if you could communicate exactly what you knew, it's not like I on the receiving end would be able to understand exactly what you were trying to communicate, right? Even if you were flawless in your communication. That gets down to like these linguistic problems in Wittgenstein and things of this stuff, things of this nature. But we can definitely meet in a middle ground. But I think quietism is closer to solipsism or solipsistic than defeatist, because it is trying to pose the actual question, but it gets hung up on the mechanisms of communication, but it still wants to answer the question.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I'm just being a little overly critical because I think it's a little absurd, but that's okay.
It's quite silly. I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah. It's very
Especially-
snarky.
Yeah, especially if you don't want to talk to somebody.
Yes, absolutely. That is a very good conversational shutdown right there. All right, cool. Well, let's move on to the next one.
But
Yes, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I feel like it could be a little dangerous though to say that to somebody that's like on hallucinogenics or something.
Oh my gosh, I know, right? Just break their brain. What do you mean by "how are you"?
Oh, and they just walk away.
Yeah. And next we get to I'm going to have to try to pronounce this correctly. Aristotelianism. Sure, why not? Of course, deriving from the philosopher Aristotle. The tagline for this one is "A life well lived is good enough." I kind of like this one. It's circa 3rd century. Again, the Greek philosopher Aristotle reminded us that no one lives a good life in order to achieve some other goal. Being a good person in of itself is sufficient. Virtue is the goal, and there is no list of virtues because we all know what they are. For example, it is a virtue to have friends, and we do not need to be taught that. Virtues and rules of ethics are not a theoretical concept. According to Aristotle, a human being knows what is good. And I pulled the quote from Aristotle himself. He said, "A happy life is thought to be one of excellence. Now, an excellent life requires exertion and does not consist in amusement. If happiness is activity in accordance with excellence, it is reasonable that it should be in accordance with the highest excellence, and this will be that of the best thing in us." And yeah, so I kind of like this take on it. Aristotle really believed that, like, if you're just going to do it, like the meaning of the thing is to do the thing, and don't attach any more sort of loftiness to it. The act of being and the act of living a good life in of itself is the point. And I think that that's kind of, it's frank, it's a little bit basic, but it definitely rings true to me in some respects.
Yeah. To live the good life. That's a beautiful thing. And I definitely agree with it too. I actually took a class about like the good life, and it's so simple and yet so fraught with difficulty, because again you get back into these you know dilemmas where it's like, well, who says and how and what gets in the way of that, and conflicting situations like stealing a loaf of bread to feed a hungry kid.
Mhm.
So I do think that there's challenges, but aspirationally I do like it. I like the idea of trying to be good, at least better than Hobbes. Like, I don't think we're all
Yeah,
evil.
of course. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that this line, "being a good person in itself is sufficient." And I think that there's something really poignant about that, because a lot of us will try to give ourselves lofty goals in life. And most of them are good for us to kind of reach a little bit farther than our ability. But a lot of the times I think we find ourselves set up for failure in that respect. So maybe keeping this one in your back pocket will help alleviate some of the existential angst when you feel like you're not meeting a goal.
Like Aristotelianism? Aristotelianism,
Yeah.
It's like I do enjoy it. Sort of like you said, like it takes the weight off of that failure aspect of things by just doing the thing, like living, like the craft of life is to live it good enough. Virtues can be self-evident, but at the same time, I think we have to ask the question if it benefits us. I'm trying to remember is Necromachane Ethics, where he kind of gets more into the stuff, but I do enjoy some of his views on craft, where it's like this is one of focusing on any craft is one of the vehicles to live this sort of good life. And understanding friends as a virtue is good, but there's also different kinds of friends, right? There's friendship via utility. I think there's three groups: friendship by utility, um, friendship by like I think it's like a one-way relationship type thing,
Hmm.
and then the actual like altruistic sense of the word friendship, right? The true friendship sort of thing. I may be a little rusty on that, but it's definitely a good like base meaning if there's none other present, right? You can work into other types of philosophies or blend them in together when you're trying to build out your own meaning in life.
Yeah, it's like a yeah, it's like in case of existential dread, break glass for Aristotelianism. You know, it's like yeah,
Unless
it's
you
like,
want to go nihilistic,
right,
then
right,
that's
right.
a
That's true.
whole other conversation.
That's very true. That's very true. Oh, Ayla, you got anything else to add on that one?
No, I think you're
Good enough.
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be very Aristotle of
I
us.
think
It's
my
good enough.
brain is starting to get a little tired.
I know,
So
I
the
know.
answers are going to be getting shorter and shorter.
I know. I'm trying to think because we're at 15 and I got 23. So let's just do a couple more and then we can wrap this up, huh? Because we've
Okay.
already been going for 2 hours. So
Ooh, and
Did
if
you
we
wanna-
reach 20 subscribers, we will do the rest on
no, we'll just do
Friday.
we'll do the next episode and either on Friday or next week, and we could just
Sweet.
kind of wrap it into one episode. That'll be fine enough, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Well, we're going to talk about Stoicism, and we've already kind of broached this one, so it might be a quick one. But the tagline here is "Only through wisdom does one know freedom." And the Stoics, circa 3rd century again, want you to be free from desire for pleasure or fear of pain. If you want to be free from desire or fear or pain, you must eschew emotion. And how does one become dispassionate? Only through wisdom can one be free to act justly. A wise person becomes a sage through rational action and does not violate the laws of nature. Hellenistic philosopher Zeno of Citium founded the Stoic school of philosophy in Athens around 300 BC. And the only complete Stoic works we have are by Seneca, Epictetus, Epictetus, thank you. Appreciate it. And the Roman philosopher Marcus Aurelius, whose diary meditations recording his progress on self-transformation towards becoming a sage. So this sort of sage quality is very important. And of course, I have to have a quote from Marcus Aurelius as well as his picture there. And it says, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it. And it is your power to wipe out this judgment now." I've always liked Stoicism. I think it's very empowering. I think it's, putting you in the driver's seat in a way, making you responsible for how you perceive the world, how you receive the world, and what you kind of put out into the world yourself. And there are definitely flaws. Eschewing emotion can be very difficult, and sitting on a mountain isn't the most productive for society most of the time. But I do definitely think that there are virtues within Stoicism that we perhaps take for granted.
Yeah. Did you want me to go first?
Yeah. Well, you
No.
like this one, or you probably
Mhm.
have more to say about it than me. I mean, I've been catching on, but I'm like late to the party.
No, it's all good. I've always enjoyed Stoicism as well. It can get a little dark though. So, for example, Epictetus in his writings, he would tell you that if Ayla fell off a cliff, you can
Hey.
just get a new wife. You'll be fine. You shouldn't be sad about it.
Yes.
It's just like,
Just walk it
dude.
off.
Yeah, that'd be great. But some of the nicer points that come out of it is like, you can't get angry over the things that you don't control. If you
Mhm.
don't control it, you shouldn't bother you. And that gets close to like the first step of AA is something very similar, right?
Mhm.
So that it's in the management of anger through wisdom. The Stoics saw anger as a very stupid thing. Only a stupid human gets angry.
Mhm.
And that's where it's been most beneficial for me, because you can't get caught up in your emotions to the point where you lash out, or where I can lash out, or where I can just get frustrated for whatever reason. But if you slow down, it's like, well, I have no control over the situation. Why am I being angry? This is dumb. I can't control everything.
Yes. Yeah.
um, there is nothing I could do about somebody passing away, so it doesn't help for me to spend months wallowing in depression. It's not
Mhm.
productive, right? I have to go out, I have to go work, I have to do something. um, so it has its benefits, but at the same time, when it where it sees things like suicide, so it's wholly acceptable, and Stoicism to kill yourself. There's a thing by Seneca where he says, if you're feeling the most pain, simply flip your wrists and see those are like your avenues of freedom, or something like that. Like, you can slip your wrist and be free from pain. Um, I take more of like a pessimist point of view, where that's a very clumsy experiment, because the answer you're looking for kills the vehicle in which you would get the answer from, right?
Right. Yeah. That's very true.
But it is, in a sense, wise, where like, if you are dealing with so much pain in your life that you just can't bear it anymore, who am I to tell you that you need to go on living? Who am I to
Right.
force that upon you if you that's your thing? So Stoicism is good. I enjoy it, but it does have its wisdoms, but it can be very dark.
Very cold.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's through staving off the influence of emotion that
Hmm.
it gets cold like that.
Yes, absolutely. Ayla?
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, Mike. And one I've definitely thought about. And again, I think that's part of why this is part of a larger set of philosophies, almost as if they
They were
took a bunch
parts of
of
a whole.
people. Well, no, but more like they said, okay, you go talk on the merits of emotions and feelings, and you go talk on the merits of stoicism, and they just sent people in these different directions to then debate about it. And these
Mhm.
became these like schools of thought. And I read there's it's the Daily Stoic. Are you
Yeah.
familiar with that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And they have, social accounts. They have an email that they send out. I don't read all the emails, but when I do, I'm pleasantly surprised by just the consider considering of the idea. So for example, I obviously wear my emotions on my sleeves, get very passionate about things, and so it's helpful to me to get a little dose of the stoic mindset. It's a good frame of reference. And more recently, one of the things they talked about was tied into James Baldwin quote about just the experiences of others. And so it was kind of a cool kick in the pants, because it was like, if you think that your suffering is the most, read. And when you read and you learn of other people's experiences, from the past or current, you find out that you're not that alone. And they talk about Marcus Aurelius's diary,
Mm.
which he didn't think was going to be read by everybody. It was his personal diary, but it got
Yeah.
published. And, you see this great man having these, you're not great, well, great by some standards, but just this, figure who was in a lot of power, having these really human responses and having really relatable thoughts.
Hmm.
And when those thoughts are shared, it can offer peace to some that are having those same thoughts, because they feel less alone. And so I think that Stoicism, in its fundamental core, can be cold, but I do think that the application and the lens of Stoicism can definitely be uplifting and a source, or maybe like a vehicle, to allow us to be warmer than we otherwise would have been.
Yeah, and I can definitely see it as empowering as well. I think that being able to recognize that you are in charge of the way you view the world, and in fact, you are in charge of your own personal reality. While it may seem daunting, um, it's still very empowering as well.
And it
Hmm.
requires a lot of discipline. It's
Yeah,
another thing that the
absolutely.
Stoics are huge on: discipline of the mind, discipline of the body. So, like, yeah, you can get warmer, especially when you like diving into those darker realms of the human experience, right? Things that people may not be so comfortable in talking to with friends or with family. And picking up a book of Stoicism will actually can help that, because it will, you said, like through discipline, remove the emotion from the situation, and thus giving you at least a better head on your shoulders on how to approach some problem that you're having in your life.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's pretty right on. I think we could probably wrap it up here if you guys are cool with that. We can save the rest for Friday, and for those listening, Friday's conversation will cover modern humanism, subjectivism, liberalism, Kantianism, nihilism, pragmatism, logical empiricism, existentialism, and my personal favorite, absurdism.
Oh, this is
So
going to be a long conversation.
it'll be another long conversation, but I think it'll be worth it,
Doozy.
and we'll be able to wrap a bow on this within 2 episodes. So, but yeah, do you have anything you want to add before we wrap up?
Well, thank you for doing the legwork on this episode and our upcoming one.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, well, it's I always thought it's cool to see a sample. It's a little Epicureanism, right? We're sampling different ideas, and I think by doing them so close to one another, and in this historical kind of presentation, it is kind of cool to see the evolution of thought.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And how all of these, how these relate to each other, how they contrast, all of that stuff. Because, like as I said at the beginning of this, I think really the ultimate meaning of all of this, this episode and Friday's episode is that you are allowed to take a grab bag. You're allowed to take a mixed bag of ideas and formulate that into your own personal philosophy for life. And you don't necessarily have to ascribe to one or the other. You can take the good things from all of them, or take none of them, and create your own personal sort of meaning. So yeah, I hope that everybody enjoyed that one. Thank you guys very much for indulging me. And thank you, all of you out there, for listening. We very much appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a thumbs up and perhaps a subscription to our YouTube channel. That would very much help us out. We're looking forward to creating more content for you guys, and we just hope that you're enjoying it. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I think that's it. Ayla, Mike, thank you guys. Until next time, Cognonauts, you stay out there, and we'll catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.